I do apologize for the late start. It was for good reason, but trust me. I'm delighted that you're all here. Thank you very much. I know a fine bunch of people, very busy in their normal day, and to spare this time to come and attend this seminar, it's much appreciated. And I'm also delighted to have with me such a distinguished group of people with a special visit and a special mission in our neck of the woods. So I want to thank them all for coming. And before I even start, I want to thank Ms. Janet Alberda for his heroic efforts in not only initiating and being very proactive in approaching us and wanting to engage with you guys and with the special elite that is close to policy making, decision making, influencing how the society evolves, the civil society, and so on. So thank you very much, Janet, and also for the other members of the consulate. I'm really delighted to see Your Excellency, Ambassador at Large for Human Rights of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Mr. Case in Africa, in many parts of the world. That includes Lusaka, Moscow, Jakarta, Nairobi, and maybe more, a lot more than that is mentioned. But guess what? He was the first Dutch ambassador in South Sudan. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Okay, right. So that speaks volumes. I'm not going to take much long, but I just want to emphasize that the first part of this session, which is public, Mr. Van Baar will be speaking. We'll take a short break, then we'll come back for question and answers. And I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. Good to see all you here, and that there's so much interest in human rights, because that, I think, is what we're going to talk about. I will tell something about my job, about the Dutch position, say, on human rights, and about my what I've been doing these days, say, and why I come to Iraq and the Kurdistan region. So, a human rights ambassador, it is something which was established in the Netherlands 17 years ago. And the then government thought it would be useful to have an ambassador just to underline the importance of human rights. The government takes in its foreign policy as well. And it is not only the government at that time, it was also parliament. And actually it was also society. Because in the Netherlands, and one indication is that, relatively speaking, Amnesty International in the Netherlands is the biggest, say, chapter of Amnesty worldwide, if you see it, say, in comparison of the number of the population. And a lot of people in the Netherlands are, say, concerned with human rights. So therefore also this function has been in the government through all the different cabinets we have. And therefore, I'm now in office as a human rights ambassador since 2 years. And for our policy, it is security, and it is, say, in an article that say, something that we find very important. And so with the rule of law, the international rule of law is also not only dealt with human rights, but indeed also with security and also with prosperity as such. Human rights is broad, and what we do say in our foreign policy is that Cabinet normally writes a letter to Parliament to set out in the Cabinet period which human rights they will focus on, because otherwise it is a lot of human rights. And so the present government, for them it's a focus on freedom of expression, online and offline. It is freedom of religion and belief, and the freedom not to have a religion or belief. It is business and human rights, and it's the most severe violations of human rights, and then it's like what happened in South Sudan, but also what Daesh is doing, say, in your country. But we have three top priorities. This is the human rights defenders, because we think people in their own society, so who come up for human rights and who fight for human rights, they should be, say, supported. It is women, and it is LGBTI, so lesbian, gay, bisexuals, transgender, and intersex. And why these two groups? Because we are gay, you still, and that is what we would like to undermine. And we don't ask people just to accept their way of living or to approve of it. Even if you don't like people, even if people live, that is something which we see, say, worldwide. So how does it? So the international institutions we make a lot of use of, and of course we would like to operate always within the human rights instruments. It is Parliament can request, say, to the Minister to send his human rights ambassador to those countries where there are worries about. The Minister can also say, well, I'm worried about the situation, I will send my human rights ambassador. And to give you an example, it was on the 2nd of January, I turned on the radio, I was in the car, and then we had just the executions of 47 people in Saudi Arabia. And I also traveled to countries where we think, or where we see, that we can work with, that we can have, say, a cooperation with, and that we can do much more internationally. And I go to countries with which we have a broad relation, like, for example, we are supporting the coalition, say, against Daesh, and also this policy of us, and that human rights are important. And human rights are important, say, for us, in the because on the Daesh, that we show of your country as such. Kurdistan, your region, with the in that Iraq and also here in Kurdistan, it is very be attention to the fact have like are also useful, especially when you go into an area, you know, where you have men and women needs have different protection, or you have to have eye for the needs of women in conflict and also in post-conflict, because what is happening, you know, after the battle, say, has been fought, what is happening then, and that is, of course, is a very important thing, that you have people who take care of also of the position of women as such. One of the things since I'm in office, say, one of the things what we always see and what we hear criticism is like human rights is Western, and it is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Indeed, it was, say, the proclamation was in the US. But people forget that people who worked on it were people from China, from India, from Turkey, from the Middle East, from Latin America, from all over the world. They worked on it. But what we see indeed is that although every country has a foreign policy on human rights, this foreign policy, 9 out of 10, a country, they promoted well, and as the peaceful society worldwide, for a stable and peaceful world. We do that. It is a lot of North Scandinavian countries, UK, US, Canada. you get the impression that it is Western. And so what I try to do as well is to have those countries in other parts of the world, which are also, say, you know, when it comes and our human rights are important, also to speak more out and to show, not only in Geneva or New York, where only the diplomats see them, but also, say, worldwide, that they support human rights. So that is something I think is important, also for the world to show that human rights. A woman being raped in Mosul, in Amsterdam, in Cape Town, or in Shanghai, there's no difference. In Rio, something which belongs to the of our foreign policy, because in the end, you might think that by just human rights, it doesn't work. You might reach stabilization. You don't see conflict. Long and on human rights, and it's
much.
Well, I think so. Well, what is important, so first and foremost, is the accountability, and of course, I mean the instrument of accountability, of course, is Parliament. Yeah? So I think first you should have a Parliament and make sure a Parliament is there, because it's also Parliament and parliamentarians that could demand accountability from the government if things are not working. About enforcement of laws. It's about law enforcement, and then you should have the security, say, troops that do the enforcement, should be trained on human rights and should also know how to act. So it's about the judiciary as well. In fact, it's quite complex as such. It is, and say also in our countries, also well, make sure what your politicians, say, who want to be elected, say, what are they elected for? Say the minorities right now, when things not when a woman was beaten by her husband at home and came to a police station, well, they would say, well, what do we need to do? Yeah? And so it's also a process. It is a process. It is not that you have a change from one day to another day, because although human rights are universal, you know, the way to get there, you need to also to know what is the language you need to speak. Yeah, what is the language that the one you need to convince would like to hear as well. And say when people, for example, come up with religious, they say, well, it cannot be this human right, for example, LGBT, because of our religion. Well, we have people who just also go into the Quran or into the Bible, and they can counteract, say, the narrative of the people who are against this change, for example. And it also, I must say, it also needs brave people. And that is what we see, because the change should come from within society. So you need to have brave people who are, say, willing to stick out their neck and risk, indeed, I mean, some people can be, or whatever, that's what I see when I travel, but and that is why we find human rights defenders so important, and that we support them and also show that support. And of course it's pressure from outside as well, that helps a lot. So if a country is receptive to that, because there are other countries who are not receptive to that. Say I was ambassador in South Sudan, but like I've also been briefly in Sudan, and in Sudan, I mean, they wouldn't react to foreign pressure. Certainly not, because say to show that they're against it, it even say show them some braveness as such. But I think these issues count. I think more practical what you see, and that's an interesting thing. What we see now, the development, what I mentioned, is business and human rights. And what you see in some societies, and we see it in Bangladesh, where you have a lot of factories who are for the family, or women cannot even are receptive to it, because if they do business in the West, for example, we have an action plan on business and human rights, and that we hold, say, businesses accountable for not only what they do in their own company, but their whole supply line. They should, say, make clear what is being done in their whole supply line. And that is becoming more and more raising awareness. And so the consumer in the EU has, for example, trade agreements with countries, and it's called the GSP+, in which they can trade to Europe on, say, very favorable, say, conditions, progress in the field of human rights, labor rights, and environment. And these instruments, they help, yeah? But these are instruments from abroad. And these are foreign instruments. And I think, say, in your own society, it's really that what is written in the law as well, that should be enforced. And what is important also is whom you have to have independent institutions who you can refer to, say, a human rights institution. And what we have is a politician, a minister who is a politician. When that comes to parliament, he has to take care of his own reputation, his political reputation, and his political life depends on it. He can be sent home, say, if he doesn't have a proper reaction to complaints by citizens via the ombudsman to his ministry about accountability. And I think
lot of experience. There are people who will take a break.